Hello and welcome to Paul's Thorn, a podcast that explores disability in the Bible, its stories, meanings, and impact on faith, with the goal of examining how Scripture portrays disability, challenge common interpretations, and offer fresh theological insights. My name is Angela Vincent, and thank you for joining me today. In the 2 weeks since I last recorded this podcast, I guess my primary focus has been very much on school. Well, other than, of course, work and everything else that's going on. But as far as what's taking up all my free time outside of work and family, then for sure it's been school at the moment. Last weekend I ended up having, I think it was like 8 different assignments plus tests. Well, I'd already done the tests, so they were due last Sunday, but I had already completed them, so I was lucky there. But I think it was 8 other assignments that ended up being due over the weekend. Because of the commute, I spend about 12 hours a day when I go into work, focused on work. So then in the about 6 hours in the day that I have left, about 3 or 4 of them now have been devoted to finishing schoolwork. So at least the semester ends in about 2 weeks, so that's going to make it a lot easier. But between now and then, it for sure feels like there's about only school going on as far as personal things. Last weekend we did end up buying a new used car, partly because, we tend to get cars and we drive them until they die essentially, but the last one finally gave up the ghost. Didn't make it almost to the house the first time. We got it stopped halfway up the hill to the house. And we had to wait 24 hours, and then the next day it had enough to get right back. So at least it's back in the driveway. So that was, we drove it till it died, getting to the point where we needed to do something. So we spent last Saturday doing that. Mostly I was irritated because it took a lot of, 4 hours of potential study time out of the time I needed to complete some of my schoolwork. But yeah, I guess in some ways now I remember what it was like to go to college for the first time. And so it's good to kind of have that remembrance and remember it wasn't all fun and games, during that period. The good thing, about being so busy with this has been that it's helped me to reprioritize some things that maybe were getting a little out of hand. I know I have this bad habit of, once I start something, I like to keep going with it, and I don't like to let it go even when it maybe pushes too many time boundaries. So for the last, it's been 7 or 8 months now, I've been playing Candy Crush as a way to de-stress. And so I have 3 different versions of the game on my phone, and every single day it was giving out, if you go back every day, then you get free prizes, and if you don't, then you basically restart. And so I was at 187 days in a row or something that I had gone every single day to get my prize. And I came in one day this week and it told me that I had failed to come in the day before, which I still don't believe that's true. I think I go in there at least every day and play 1 round so that I could keep going. But anyway, it said that I had missed a day, and so I had to restart my count. And I don't think that had the intention that Candy Crush developer thought it was going to have, because instead of making me want to continue, I finally felt like a relief valve had been opened. And since then, I have not been on Candy Crush. And so that was, in some ways it's good. Finally kind of breaking loose of certain patterns or habits. So I guess the kind of tying that back to school, having that focus where I have to spend so much time on school has allowed me to get rid of some things that I'm probably better off not spending so much time on. The one bad thing is, this morning I was trying to catch up on emails, and I discovered how far behind I'd gotten. I like to keep track of friends and family on Facebook, see what they're doing, and so usually I'll go check my email on a Saturday and go through and see, what's happened, what notifications I've gotten over the week as far as Facebook, and then go like or upvote or love people's post because I do care about them and want to know that I am paying attention to them in their life. But I realized this morning as I was going through, it took 2 hours to get through everything, that I had really fallen far behind. So in some ways it was good because there are some emails in my email that I realized I don't really care about. like a lot of them associated with buying things like magic candle wax and stuff, or Joffrey's coffee. But other things I did feel bad because I'd missed certain events in people's lives. So again, it's good to, I guess, go through a period where something is so intense and taking all your time that it forces you to re-examine some of the other priorities in your life. I guess the only other thing I have coming up or going on that's a little bit unusual is that I will be going on a kind of a business trip. I guess it's a conference trip for Society of Women Engineers next month in New Orleans. So it'll be the second time I've been to New Orleans. So I'm getting pretty excited about that and trying to plan that a little bit and see what would be fun to do or what restaurants it would be nice to be able to go to. So it's nice to have something to think about and plan for. So with that, I guess I'll get started on today's episode. So in today's episode, we'll be exploring a profound and sometimes painful part of the Christian journey, the dark night of the soul. This phrase describes those seasons when God feels silent, prayer feels empty, and faith feels harder to hold on to. Far from being a sign of weakness, many believers have walked through this experience. I myself have done this. So together we'll uncover how the dark night connects to Scripture, how it shapes the Christian life, and how even in silence, God is doing his deepest work. So the idea for this episode came up when I was researching for episodes 6 and 7, Sharing in the Suffering of Christ, part 1 and 2. And so at the time I was thinking it really resonated with me because I felt like for a long period of my life I was in the dark night of the soul. I didn't know it was called that at the time that I was going through it. And so in researching, I was like, oh, I finally have a name for what that experience was. So again, when I was a teenager, I had felt very disconnected from God because of, and again, I hate to tie everything back to autism, but it probably is largely tied since that's how I view the world and see things. I felt very disconnected to God, partly because I was, I think, so different from other people and felt so disconnected to them because of it. And so in how I was experiencing the world, I felt very much like I was an outsider and not connected to people. And so for a long time, had a lot of anger with God and felt very disconnected. It took me a long time to get through that, to come to something different. I would say most of my teens and 20s probably, before kind of coming through it in my 30s. So again, that's why the topic really resonated with me so much, and I thought it would be a good one to explore. The phrase dark night of the soul comes from the writings of the 16th century Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross, who lived from 1542 to 1591. He was a Spanish Carmelite priest, mystic, and reformer who co-founded the Discalced Carmelites with Saint Teresa of Avila. He was renowned for his profoundly influential mystical poetry and prose, such as The Dark Night of the Soul and the Spiritual Canticle, which describe the soul's journey toward union with God. John's teachings, which emphasize theological depth, contemplation, and the transformation through suffering, shaped Christian spirituality and earned him the title Doctor of the Church. So what exactly does dark night of the soul mean? Well, it's essentially a necessary God-initiated process for spiritual purification. This painful phase strips the soul of its imperfections and attachment to earthly pleasures and spiritual consolations, moving it from active to passive prayer, and ultimately to a deeper unconditional union with God through pure faith. It is a journey of darkness and suffering, but one that leads to radical freedom and a profound peace in divine love. So as far as what it means in someone's life, or just in general what it means, it doesn't mean depression in the modern psychological sense, though it could feel very similar to that. But it's a spiritual trial and a period where prayer can feel dry, where God can feel absent, and the believer is stripped of familiar comforts. Again, the purpose is purification, the stripping away of attachments, pride, and self-reliance, so that one can be united with God in a deeper, more selfless love. In St. John's view, it's not punishment, but a necessary stage towards spiritual maturity and intimacy with God. So besides St. John of the Cross, many Christians have also experienced it. So that was why we were talking about it a little bit in those previous episodes. But some of the examples of folks who have experienced it: Mother Teresa. Her decade-long sense of God's absence has become a modern case study in the dark night. Her persistence in service despite silence is seen as heroic faith. So with St. Teresa, letters that published after her death reveal that she spent decades feeling God's absence, describing herself as living in darkness. Yet she continually faithfully served the poor. This is actually one of the clearest modern examples of someone who has experienced the dark night, but also did not stop them from continuing to do good work and to helping folks. So in our podcast episode, we also talked about Saint Teresa of Lisieux, who suffered what would be considered the dark night of the soul towards the last 18 months of her life. And so during those last 18 months, she experienced an intense inner trial, especially as she was battling tuberculosis. So again, far from being a sign of weak faith, she saw it as a deeper way to be united with Christ, especially as far as the crucifixion, when Christ himself, and we'll talk about this in a bit, felt abandoned on the cross. So St. Teresa of Lisieux had continued to act with love and trust despite this feeling of abandonment, clinging to God with no feeling of joy but with pure persevering faith. Her dark night of the soul revealed the depth of her sanctity and gave even more weight to her little way of trusting and loving in the midst of darkness. Another Christian who experienced the dark night of the soul was Henri Nouwen. So he was a Dutch Catholic priest, professor, and prolific author known for his spiritual writings that integrated psychological insights with Christian faith and a deep understanding of human vulnerability. His impact was widespread as his transparent and direct writing style, along with his themes of compassion, community, and God's unconditional love, resonated with people from diverse backgrounds, drawing many into a more profound spiritual life. He left a legacy through his over 39 books, which have sold millions of copies globally, and his work ministering to the marginalized all contributed to a more holistic and accessible form of spirituality. Another Christian who experienced the dark night of the soul was C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis was a 20th century British writer, scholar, and Christian apologist, best known for the Chronicles of Narnia fantasy series and the Christian apologetics work Mere Christianity. His impact comes from making complex Christian ideas accessible through imaginative storytelling and clear arguments, where he reached millions of readers and significantly influenced modern Christian literature and apologetics. After his wife Joy died, C.S. Lewis felt abandoned by God and documented his spiritual struggle and a grief observed. As he wrote there, "When you are happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing him, you will be, or so it seemed, welcome with open arms. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face." Also having experienced the dark night of the soul was John Bunyan, known for Pilgrim's Progress. So John Bunyan was a 17th century English Puritan preacher and author. In Pilgrim's Progress, his early life as a tinker was followed by an intense spiritual awakening marked by profound internal conflict, which he chronicled in his autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. In this work, Bunyan describes a period of spiritual torment, often referred to as the dark night of the soul, where he wrestled with intense guilt, doubt, and despair over his salvation. These struggles deeply influence his writing, providing the vivid personal experience behind the trials faced by the characters in his allegories. His refusal to cease preaching during the restoration of the English monarchy led to his imprisonment, during which he wrote The Pilgrim's Progress and turned his own painful experiences into a timeless narrative of faith and redemption. Before writing this famous allegory, he he experienced seasons of spiritual despair and questioning, which shaped his portrayal of Christian, passing through the valley of the shadow of death. Another famous Christian to have experienced the dark night of the soul was Martin Luther. So Martin Luther's life was marked by a profound spiritual crisis, a prolonged period of deep despair and anxiety he called the Anfechtung, or the dark night of the soul. This internal struggle stemmed from his inability to chronicle his sense of sinfulness with God's justice, which he experienced as vengeful rather than benevolent. His struggle led him to deeply study the Bible, particularly Paul's letter to the Romans, where he found a gracious God through Christ and the principle of salvation by faith alone, which became the core of his theology and sparked the Protestant Reformation. So again, the struggles that he had during his life actually helped him to sharpen his theology of grace. So looking at all these figures, what we see is that the dark night was not a failure of faith, but more often it was the soil of spiritual transformation. So while the phrase itself doesn't actually show up in Scripture, the idea of it does show up in different places in the Bible, and primarily is the idea of spiritual absence or a seeming absence of God's presence in one's life. So one of the people in the Bible to have experienced this feeling of absence of God's presence was King David. So King David was the second king of ancient Israel, famous for defeating the Philistine giant Goliath and establishing Jerusalem as the political and religious capital of the kingdom. He united the Israelite tribes, expanded the kingdom's territories through military conquests and alliances, and was renowned for his skill as a warrior, musician, and poet, authoring many of the Psalms. Despite a reign marked by both great achievements and significant personal failures, including adultery with Bathsheba and facing rebellions, he founded the Judean dynasty. He's a central figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, with his lineage being the source of the title Messiah. So from Psalms today, I'm going to be reading Psalm 13, which the context for it is one of deep personal anguish and perceived divine abandonment, likely from the perspective of David experiencing a time of intense oppression and sorrow. So Psalm 13, for the director of music, a psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. So even there you see at the end that despite feeling God's absence, he continues to praise God, even in the midst of his intense sorrow. The phrase isn't, again, used directly in the Bible, but another person in the Bible who certainly had the opportunity to experience this kind of feeling was Job. So I won't read much of the book of Job today, since I just did an episode about it last time. But Job suffers, feels abandoned throughout the book, and yet continues to wrestle with God. So though ancient, Job is perhaps the most famous biblical sufferer who lived through something akin to the dark night, specifically silence from God in the midst of deep suffering. Someone else from the Bible who may have experienced this seeming absence of God was Elijah. So the prophet Elijah was a powerful figure in the 9th century BCE Israel, known for his unwavering devotion to God and his challenge to King Ahab and Queen Jezebel's promotion of the worship of non-God gods. I don't like to say I think I've mentioned this before, but I don't like to say the names of any gods that aren't God, just on principle. So I won't share what name of what god that was. He performed miraculous feats, including a contest on Mount Carmel, where he called down fire from heaven and pronounced a severe drought upon the land. After demonstrating God's singular power, Elijah was miraculously taken to heaven in a fiery chariot, appearing later with Jesus at the Transfiguration. His legacy as a prototype for the Messiah's forerunner and an apocalyptic figure endures. So in 1 Kings 19, Elijah, after a great victory, flees from Jezebel's threat and experiences deep depression and a death wish. Fleeing to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, he is miraculously sustained by an angel and finds God in a still small voice after displays of wind, earthquake, and fire. God then commissions him to anoint new kings and assures him that he is not alone, as 7,000 others remain faithful to the Lord. So I'll be reading from 1 Kings 19, and this will be actually go from 1 to 18, so it's going to be a little bit longer passage. And this is from a section called Elijah Flees to Horeb. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. The Lord appears to Elijah. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have become very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Get out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have become very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elijah son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elijah will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to be, and all whose mouths have not kissed him." So another person who may have felt some despair and feeling as if God were absent from him was Jeremiah. But even despite this despair, Jeremiah still held on to his hope in God's faithfulness. So in Lamentations 3, he expresses his deep personal suffering and the devastation of Jerusalem, but again he still finds hope by remembering God's faithfulness. He describes feeling God's wrath and abandonment, but shifts to affirming that God's compassions and mercies are new every morning, preventing complete consumption of his people and offering a promise of future restoration. This chapter serves as a turning point from despair to hope, rooted in God's steadfast character and covenant love for his people, and describes a soul being bowed down with bitterness and loss, yet later turning towards hope. So I'll be reading from Lamentations 3. I'll start first by reading verses 1 through 9. Then I'll go to 17 through 27. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. He has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains. Even when I call out or cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has barred my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone and all that I had hoped from the Lord. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I will remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I will call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. So in the Bible, probably the most famous of all moments, people who may have felt abandoned by God, is Jesus on the cross when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That particular passage has a background in the Psalms itself, specifically Psalm 22, 1 and 2. So I'll read that first, and then I'll read the passage from Matthew where Jesus says this. And again, this is a psalm from David, which is kind of an interesting tie back to some of the experiences and emotional suffering that he had had. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and am not silent. Actually, I'll read one more, so 1 through 3. This is a good one to remember. Yet you are enthroned as a holy one. You are the praise of Israel. So from Matthew 27, I'll read verses 45 through 56 from a section called The Death of Jesus. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 6th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a stick and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rock split. The tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he is the Son of God. Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's son. So from a Christian understanding of the idea, many Christian traditions actually see the dark night of the soul as part of the process of sanctification or spiritual growth. And so it challenges this idea of easy faith by forcing believers to trust in God even when they don't have easy emotional reassurances. It echoes Paul's teaching, 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith and not by sight. So in short, the dark night of the soul is the experience of God's hiddenness that paradoxically draws a person into greater reliance on him. In the Bible, it looks like the cries of the psalmists, Job's lament, and Christ's anguish on the cross. In Christian life, it is often described as a necessary stage in moving from surface-level faith to a deeper union with God. So while originally a monastic or a mystical idea, today it's recognized as something that ordinary Christians can experience. So there's different, characteristics of how the dark night of the soul might show up in somebody or how it might look or feel to someone. People who may feel God has withdrawn from them may also be experiencing chronic illness, grief, depression, unanswered prayer, or even burnout. That's just something that I too think also that sometimes folks with disabilities struggle with all of those things, especially. I know all people struggle with those, but those are especially true if you feel as if your body were not quite the temple of the Lord that you wished it would be as far as supporting your faith. A different language that sometimes people use to describe it in modern times can be things like spiritual dryness, having a faith crisis, a spiritual deconstruction or reconstruction moment, or again, I think often burnout is the phrase that people use. So it may feel like prayers that you have given or that your prayers to God are empty, that you may feel like if you keep praying, but you're talking to a wall or you're not seeing any results of those prayers. It can feel like a loss of spiritual feeling. Maybe when you're worshiping or you're reading the Bible or going to church, you no longer feel the joy in doing those things that you once did. You may feel a sense of abandonment or a loss of hope, as if God were silent in your life or maybe just not present at the moment. It could come up as a crisis of faith where you have doubts that are arising in your life. Even though you still long for God, you may be questioning things that are going on or wondering about them. Another characteristic could be the stripping away of idols. So things that you once relied on for comfort, like maybe your status in life or your reputation, maybe your success or even your pride in how good a Christian you are, no longer bring you any satisfaction. So again, it's a little bit different from the idea of depression, though it's not the same, though you can see some overlapping in the symptoms, I suppose. So depression is primarily a mental health condition, where again, the dark night is a spiritual stripping. It's also important to remember that if you're experiencing both, that you need to think about how to treat both. So that may be, for example, prayer to help you get through the dark night, but on the other hand, maybe therapy or medication, if that would be beneficial to help you with depression. I definitely, just to do a little plug for mental health, think it's very important for folks to seek help and to not be ashamed or embarrassed about asking for help when they need it in order to be the best person they can be or to be happy and live the best life they can live. So also something to remember is that pastors often remind believers that lamenting or crying out in despair is itself an act of faith. So even if things don't feel exactly, perfect, or you have some question or you're going through this dark night of the soul, that itself can be an act of worship and of communion with God. And that doesn't necessarily mean that by questioning that you are not still in God's presence. I also want to point out that sometimes it's just very difficult in modern times too, especially with kind of modern American life being what it can or what it is, to not feel some despair or loss of hope when it feels like things are getting very dark or there's a lot of violence going on. And so it's important to remember that God is always present, even if you may not feel Him so immediately in your life. So the dark night of the soul, again, is not a sign of a weak faith, but a step towards a mature and resilient faith. One where there is deeper humility, maybe less reliance on things of the world and more reliance on God Himself, a greater compassion for others' suffering. I know that when I have experienced suffering, that when I come out of it, that I have often felt more empathy for other people and their, the current experiences that they're going through. And then also a step towards unshakable faith, one that's rooted not in emotion, but in trusting God. What is the purpose of the dark night in today's faith life? For most Christian teachers, the dark night highlights three purposes. So the first is purification, meaning that God allows consolations like feeling good when you pray or you joy in worship to fall away from you so that you learn that faith isn't dependent on those things. Faith is dependent on your worship of God, but not necessarily some of the trappings that can come with that. It also highlights the idea of a maturation of faith. So believers essentially move from milk to solid food, borrowing from Hebrews 5, learning to walk by faith and not feelings. So I'll read that real quick. That's Hebrews 5:12 through 14. Actually, I'll read Hebrews 11 through 14 from a section called Warning Against Falling Away. We have much to say about this, but it is hard to explain because you are slow to learn. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And finally, the third purpose for the dark night of the soul in today's faith life is union with God. The silence makes space for deeper intimacy, where faith rests in God's character rather than his gifts. So there's different ways that churches today teach about it. So in evangelical circles, it's often framed as spiritual doubt or a wilderness season, drawing parallels with Israel's 40 years of wandering in the desert or with Jesus' time in the desert. Catholic and Orthodox traditions continue to emphasize St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila, seeing it as a necessary stage of mystical growth. In charismatic and Pentecostal traditions, it is sometimes seen as a spiritual battle. God is allowing the stripping so that the believers lean into the Spirit more deeply. And in Protestant Reformed traditions, it's used to highlight God's sovereignty. His silence is never abandonment, but a way of teaching trust. So the key takeaways as far as a modern understanding of why this is going on, or how to feel reassured when this may be going on in your life, is to remember that it's something that's very common for Christians. Most serious Christian believers will feel it or face it at some point. It is not a punishment. God isn't rejecting someone, but is helping to refine them. It's transformative. While painful, it often produces humility, compassion, and a deeper faith. And it's biblically rooted, as we've seen in Job, the Psalms, Elijah, and in Jesus' cry of abandonment. It is something that helped deepen their faith, despite the fact that even for a second they felt that they may have been abandoned by God. The dark night of the soul, again, is not God's absence, but his hidden presence, training us to trust his heart when we cannot trace his hand. So if this is something that you're experiencing now, there's also lessons that you can take from the Bible. The first has to do with perseverance through personal trial. So I'll be reading 3 passages today that talk to that a little bit. The first coming from Romans 8. So from Romans 8, I'll be reading from a section, Future Glory, 18 through 25. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is not hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. So that again points us to the idea that present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory to come. Creation itself groans, but God works all things together for good. Also good to remember, keep in mind when you're experiencing a spiritual trial, is James 1, verses 2 through 4. This is from a section, Trials and Temptations. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must complete its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And finally, from Hebrews 11:32 through 40. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So what's important to learn from that passage, even heroes of the faith who have endured weaknesses, persecution, suffering, as well as not receiving what was promised, still remained faithful in waiting for God and God's kingdom. In addition to that, we can look to the Bible for comfort and hope in God's nearness. So I'm going to be reading 3 passages that speak to how we can lean on God in order to feel good despite, in some ways, feeling his absence. So from Psalm 34. So I'll be reading Psalm 34. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. My soul will boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him from all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. A righteous man may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems his servants. No one will be condemned who takes refuge in him. From Isaiah 40:27 through 31. Why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And finally from 2 Corinthians 4:7 through 12. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. I guess I'll read one more because I like this one. This is 13. It is written, I believed, therefore I have spoken. With that same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak. So things to remember if you are going through a dark night of the soul is to recognize that it's happening. Don't panic. Feeling God's absence doesn't mean that you've lost your faith or that God has abandoned you. Also distinguish it from the idea of sin. A dark night is different from living in unrepentant sin, and it's not caused by disobedience, but by God leading you deeper. So something to keep in mind, and I often, when I'm going through things that make me nervous or afraid, It's also good to have a biblical anchor, and so I'll read from Psalm 23, which I'm surprised. I guess I've never read it during this podcast, but whenever I'm scared or nervous about something, it's one of the things that I say to myself over and over in my head in order to calm down and feel reassured. So from Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Also, to remember to keep faithful in small things. Keep praying even if it feels dry. Sometimes those can be short, honest prayers, like God help me or be near. Stay with Scripture even if you don't feel it. The Psalms are especially helpful because they voice both despair and hope. Remain in Christian community. Isolation can make the silence feel even heavier. It's also important to lean on honesty with God. God is not offended by lament. Cry out like the psalmist did, like David did in Psalm 13, for example. But again, remember that when you sing to the Lord, that he has been good to you. Let go of old supports. Sometimes God removes spiritual consolations, again, like emotional highs in worship, prayer, etc., so that your faith isn't dependent on those feelings or that consolation. Allow God to strip away false securities, success, approval, even reliance on religious feelings in order that you can grow deeper in union to God. Hold on to hope in God's hidden work. Believe that the silence is not absence but preparation. Roots grow deepest in darkness. Remember Christ's own cry on the cross. Even in his silence, the Father was bringing salvation. Anchor your promises. Remember, like in Hebrews 13:5, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And finally, watch for fruits afterward. Those who endure a dark night often emerge with greater humility, a greater compassion for other people's pain, a stronger, steadier faith that's not based on emotions, and a deeper intimacy with God, paradoxically born out of his silence. The dark night is like the soil of winter. It looks barren, but underground roots are being strengthened for spring growth. So in summary, as we've seen today, the dark night of the soul is not about losing faith, but about being led into a deeper faith, one that no longer depends on feelings, easy answers, or visible signs, but rests in God's hidden presence. Saints and Christians throughout history have walked through this valley, from Job and Elijah to Mother Teresa and C.S. Lewis, and their stories remind us that God is often most at work when he seems most silent. For those living with disability, chronic illness, or deep suffering, this experience can feel even sharper, but it can also become a place where God's grace shines most clearly. The dark night is not punishment. It is often the ground where transformation, humility, and compassion take root, preparing us for a deeper union with Christ. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a bit of an emotional journey researching this episode and exploring the concept of the dark night, especially when I think about the context of my own life and coming through that into a period of deeper growth on the other side. I'll be back in 2 weeks for the next episode where we'll be talking about neurodivergence and possible examples from the Bible. Until then, remember that the dark night of the soul is not God's absence. It's his invitation to trust in him more deeply, even in the silence. Goodbye for now. Paul's Thorn, Episode 11 by Angela Vincent. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved.